Imagine a rat alone in a cage with two levers. One lever delivers food. The other lever delivers a direct jolt of pleasure straight into the reward center of its brain. Scientists ran this experiment decades ago, and the results were disturbing. Given the choice, some rats pressed the pleasure lever again and again, ignoring food, ignoring water, ignoring everything else until they collapsed from exhaustion. Pure, effortless comfort, available on demand, was enough to make them forget they were even alive. Friedrich Nietzsche never saw that experiment. He died decades before it was ever run. But in 1883, he described the exact same creature, walking around in human form, and gave it a name that should genuinely unsettle you. He called it the Last Man. If this is your first time here, before we go further, hit subscribe, tap that bell icon, and drop a like because we're building a complete series unpacking Nietzsche's ideas, and this one might be the most quietly dangerous concept he ever wrote. Here's the uncomfortable question this video is built around. What if the greatest threat to your potential isn't failure or pain or hardship at all, but comfort arriving exactly when you wanted it, in exactly the amount you asked for? Let's start with what Nietzsche actually meant by the last man, because it's one of the most prophetic passages he ever wrote, and it reads like it was written about right now, rather than a century and a half ago. And thus spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche describes a future society that has finally achieved what humanity had always claimed to want: safety, ease, the elimination of unnecessary suffering. And instead of celebrating this achievement, Nietzsche treats it as a warning. The last man, he writes, has invented happiness and blinks. Nothing troubles him. He works a little because work is a form of entertainment, but takes care that the entertainment does not exhaust him. He no longer becomes rich or poor. Both demand too much effort. He has as little pleasure for the day and as little pleasure for the night, but he honors health above everything. Read that again. This isn't a description of misery. It's a description of a life engineered to feel perfectly fine, permanently, at the cost of ever becoming anything more than what it already is. This is the trap Nietzsche saw coming. Long before smartphones, algorithms, food delivery apps, and infinite entertainment made his prediction almost unbearably literal. He believed that the moment comfort becomes easily and endlessly available, most people will choose it every single time over the difficult, uncertain, resistance-filled path toward actually becoming something greater than they currently are. And here's what makes this trap so effective. It doesn't feel like a trap while you're inside it. Nobody experiences comfort as a crisis. There's no dramatic moment of collapse, no single visible failure you can point to and say, this is where it went wrong. Comfort erodes potential the way water erodes stone. Slowly, quietly, invisibly, one easy decision at a time, until years have passed, and you look up and realize you've built an entire life around avoiding anything that might have actually grown you. Nietzsche identified the underlying mechanism with startling precision, decades before neuroscience could confirm it. He understood that growth and comfort operate on almost opposite biological principles. Growth requires resistance, a muscle tearing slightly under load and rebuilding stronger, a mind straining against a difficult problem and expanding to meet it, a person sitting inside an uncomfortable conversation and coming out the other side more capable of honesty. Comfort, by definition, is the absence of that resistance, which means a life optimized for maximum comfort is, structurally, a life optimized against growth. Not accidentally, necessarily. This is why Nietzsche made a claim that still sounds almost offensive to modern ears. He said that man does not strive for happiness. Only the Englishman does. What he meant was that a life aimed directly at happiness, at comfort, at the elimination of all friction, actually produces something smaller and less alive than a life aimed at something harder. Meaning, mastery, self-overcoming. even when that harder path produces far less moment-to-moment pleasure along the way. Let's make this concrete, because it's easy to nod along to this idea in the abstract and then walk straight back into the exact trap Nietzsche is describing. Comfort shows up disguised as reasonable choices. The job that pays enough and asks little of you, chosen over the harder path that might actually develop your abilities, because the harder path carries risk and the easy one doesn't. The relationship maintained, not because it's genuinely fulfilling, but because ending it would require an uncomfortable conversation and an uncertain future. The hours spent scrolling, streaming, consuming, not because any of it is deeply satisfying, but because it requires nothing, demands nothing, risks nothing, and fills the exact amount of time you might otherwise have spent doing something that actually frightened you a little. None of these choices look dangerous in the moment. Each one, individually, seems perfectly reasonable. Nietzsche's point is that danger was never going to arrive as a single obvious threat. It arrives as 1,000 small, comfortable decisions, each one slightly easier than the alternative, compounding quietly over years into a life that has successfully avoided almost everything that might have made it remarkable. So what's the alternative? Nietzsche wasn't arguing that comfort itself is evil, or that you should seek out suffering for its own sake. That would just be a different kind of trap, chaos mistaken for growth. His actual argument was more precise and considerably more demanding. He believed the first step is simply learning to notice comfort for what it is, rather than mistaking it for progress. This requires an honest, uncomfortable audit most people never actually perform. Look closely at where your time, energy, and attention genuinely go, and ask a very specific question about each one. Is this choice expanding me? Or is it simply the path of least resistance, dressed up as a reasonable decision? Nietzsche believed most people will discover, if they're honest, that a significant portion of their daily life is built almost entirely around minimizing discomfort rather than maximizing growth, and that they had simply never named this pattern before because comfort, unlike pain, doesn't announce itself as a problem. The second step is what Nietzsche called self-overcoming, applied specifically against comfort itself. This means deliberately, consciously choosing the slightly harder option, not because difficulty is inherently virtuous, but because the harder option is usually the one that actually builds something, while the easier one simply passes the time. The difficult conversation instead of the comfortable silence. The unfamiliar challenge instead of the well-worn routine. The pursuit that carries real risk of failure instead of the safe path that guarantees nothing will ever go wrong, because nothing will ever really happen at all. The third step is recognizing that this isn't a one-time decision, but a permanent, ongoing negotiation. Nietzsche never believed anyone permanently defeats the pull toward comfort. The last man isn't a category of persons separate from everyone else. It's a gravitational pull every single person feels every single day, and the question isn't whether you'll feel the pull. You will constantly for the rest of your life. The question is whether you'll notice it operating and choose deliberately again and again to walk in the opposite direction anyway. Here's what makes this idea genuinely revolutionary, rather than just another version of get out of your comfort zone advice you've heard 1,000 times before. Nietzsche wasn't offering a productivity tip. He was making a claim about the actual structure of a meaningful human life. That meaning itself cannot be manufactured inside conditions engineered for maximum ease. It requires genuine stakes. It requires the real possibility of failure, embarrassment, loss. Remove all of that in the name of comfort, and you haven't protected your life. You've quietly hollowed it out, replaced something that could have mattered with something that simply, comfortably passes. This is why Nietzsche's description of the last man ends the way it does. Not with the last man suffering, but with the last man blinking content, believing he has invented happiness, while everything around him that could have made his life actually remarkable slowly, permanently closes. So here's the question worth sitting with. The same one Nietzsche seemed to be asking anyone paying close enough attention to his warning. Where, in your own life, right now, have you quietly chosen the comfortable path so many times that you've stopped even noticing you were choosing it at all? And what would it actually cost you? Not in comfort, but in everything comfort has been quietly replacing, if you let yourself notice for the first time. Nietzsche never promised that walking away from comfort would feel good. He only promised that the alternative, a life carefully engineered to never really ask anything of you, guarantees it will never really give you anything back either. If this video challenged the way you think about your own daily choices, make sure you're subscribed with the bell turned on, because the next one goes even deeper into exactly how Nietzsche believed we're meant to reclaim the growth that comfort quietly steals. And you won't want to miss it.